Recapping what was a great week on the Oklahoma recruiting trail, they have done it. Welcome back, Eddie Radosevich, Josh McCuistion, George Stoya here, Soonerscoop.com recruiting report, and a little bit of an emergency type style here as it has finally happened. Oklahoma has landed a 5-star. They have landed David Stone. He commits to Oklahoma on Saturday evening. And Josh, we've talked about it. I don't want to say monumental, but this is a massive day for Oklahoma's 2024 recruiting class, as well as Brent Venables, Todd Bates, and the rest of the Oklahoma staff.
Well, let's be honest. It's 100% an emergency situation. This is the hill that half the board was convinced Oklahoma could never climb.
Sure.
Like, this was just never going to happen.
When you're making the move to the SEC, it's been discussed multiple times, multiple ways. We've talked about it on the Unofficial 40. You've wrote articles about it. It is rather important to have difference makers on the defensive line. They have the commitment with Jaden Jackson, a teammate on the IMG squad with David Stone. But let's just start with just in general. If nobody knew what David Stone was, if nobody knew what kind of player he was, what kind of player are they getting in the 5-star defensive tackle?
Well, they're getting the kind of guy that when you look back at Brent Venables and his years of great defense, whether it was at Clemson or Oklahoma, these are the guys that he has. Always that 3-technique defensive tackle. You go all the way back to Tommy Harris in the early 2000s. Gerald McCoy played a similar role. These big athletic defensive tackles who can create pressure up the middle. They are more than just they're going to eat up blocks and let guys flow to the football. David Stone, if he reaches his pinnacle, is a guy that's going to get doubled all the time, but still has the quickness and the length to disrupt passing lanes and to be a problem for quarterbacks. Because, guys, we can talk about edge rushers and how important that is, and obviously it's without question very important. But the one thing that an offense cannot cope with is pressure up the middle, because there's nothing you can do about it. There's no way to stop it. There's no way to negate it. And having guys like that, and Jaden Jackson, I mean, the interesting thing talking to, a lot of people about the David Stone situation is how underrated a lot of people think Jaden Jackson is. And so having those two together as your future in the middle, that's a really strong start because, Eddie, like you alluded to in the lead-in, you'd have to go back a long time to find the last SEC champion that didn't have a first-rounder on the defensive line. Like, that doesn't usually happen, so you've got to get these guys while you can.
Josh, is this the biggest defensive commitment since, I don't know, Gerald McCoy? I mean, I think that's what we're talking about. I think that was 2006. I think he was the last 5-star consensus 5-star defensive tackle Oklahoma had. Is this the biggest defensive recruit that they've landed since 2006?
I think so. And honestly, and we know I love Gerald. I think it might be the biggest since Tommy Harris. And again, I say that not because Gerald wasn't huge. He was a huge win for Oklahoma. Obviously, he went on to a great career, did all that we know he's done. But at that point in time, Oklahoma was landing elite defensive linemen. They landed DeMarcus Granger just the year before, a 5-star from Dallas, Kimball. So I don't think it was a proof of concept or, like I've talked about, just being a situation that can change the perception. Tommy was, because Tommy came, right off the heels of the national title game. Everybody thought Oklahoma was going to land those kind of players, but Tommy being a kid from just north of Austin, that was a big deal. David, even though he is a local kid like Gerald, I think with all that's happened last year with David Hicks, this year with Williams Nwaneri, they needed that win to show other elite guys, hey, this is where you want to go, this is where you want to be. And it, we'll get into what this could mean for the rest of the defensive line class, I'm sure, but I think it says a lot to those other guys. I mean, these are the kind of the bellwether recruits. These are the guys you've got to have that can lead you where you're wanting to go and lead the rest of the class.
When you're talking about relationships, that's something that Brent Venables has talked about, I think, since day one. He wanted to have a relational program. They wanted to be able to build. Is this a perfect example for Todd Bates and Brent Venables staying with something for over, 2-3 years now? I guess really, truly 2 years in the time that they've been in Norman. It just seems like this is something that they'll be able to point to and say, this is kind of an example of what we want.
Yeah, I think this is exactly the ideal of what they're trying to sell, of saying, we can stay in these dogfights, we can do this. And this is, guys, to anybody that can look back even a couple of years, this is what Todd Bates and Brent Venables were doing at Clemson. It's just moving that model and the tough, reality of trying to make that sale while the on-field product was not where it wanted, not where anybody wanted it to be last year. That makes it tougher. And there's part of me that wonders if that's why this dragged on the way it did for as long as it did. But I do. I mean, these are the battles they can win. They've proven that at two different schools now with landing David Stone. And I talked about it in the scoop on Friday. There was, this is over 2 years in the making. I mean, there's a lot of recruits that feel like, they went on for a long time. David Stone was offered on June 12th of 2021. I mean, you're talking over 2 years ago, and even under a previous staff. I mean, there has been a lot of connection, a lot of work Oklahoma's had to do here to make this play out the way it has. And I just think as much as people wanted to be hard on Todd Bates, be hard on Brent Venables, you've got to give them credit here. I don't, you put whatever qualifiers you wanted always from Oklahoma and try to limit why it's important. It doesn't matter how he got here. It matters that they got this player that we've said all along is probably the most important player in the class of 2024 for Oklahoma.
Josh, you mentioned it, but this was a recruitment that came down to the end here. I know Miami was obviously in the race. What was it? Was it, relationship with the parents? I know there was talks about that. Was it obviously NIL has come into play? I mean, what was it that helped Oklahoma really close this out with David when it did look like, all the way up until the announcement, there was talk about Miami?
Yeah, I think the relationship David has with the staff is pretty much unparalleled. I think there was a time, like I said during the midweek, that Michigan State had really built kind of similar ties. But as much as he was around Oklahoma and, much as he knew Todd Bates, knew Brent Venables, Eddie mentioned it, again in the midweek, how seeing him at the camp on June 15th and not just hanging out with Todd Bates or Venables or Miguel Chavis or any of the guys you would expect him to know well, but like he was out hanging out with like the GAs with the defensive backs. Like he knows everybody. Like it really was kind of stunning to see the relationships he had with everybody on the staff. I mean, JP Lossman and him, they're guys that have no connection, or at least no obvious connection to David's recruitment, have a good relationship with him. So I think that was a big part of it. I also think something I came across more and more as the week went on was there was a lot of talk that, his family doesn't want him at Oklahoma. And I don't know that that's fair. I think maybe there was a preference by some for Miami. But at the same time, I do think there are portions of his family that absolutely did want him in Oklahoma. So I think that played a role in all of this and kind of got overlooked. And frankly, I think was something I missed until a little later in the game of his recruitment. But again, I know people will say, an emergency pod for this. Again, you just can't overstate how big this is for Oklahoma and all the time and work they put into this to make today happen.
I want to get a little bit more back into the Brent Venables, the Todd Bates aspect of this, because it is such a big recruiting win for the entire staff. The more you look at this, though, Josh, and now that David Stone is committed, is this kind of one of those situations that, I guess, looking back on it, it's like, yeah, he was never going to go anywhere else but Oklahoma?
Well, I would love to say that, like, to dunk on everybody, but I mean, let's be honest. The last week, I was kind of like, let's see.
Sure.
I'm
well, there's
no
a history
than
there.
anybody else.
That's why this is so big, because they haven't been able to get over this hump.
Yes. I mean, I was literally at one point in the week thinking, if this doesn't happen, if he picks Miami, I'm going to just stay away from 5-star defensive line predictions until somebody commits. Like I'm not doing it again. I've fallen for it 3 times now. I've been burned. We watched the Crimson Corner absolutely burn. Like I was prepared for all of it. And so to be here in this moment is truly just a weight off my shoulders. Like I can't even imagine what Bates and that crew is feeling right now, just because I mean, again, I talked about it through the week. You talk to people around that program, and there was confidence, but it was like, we've been here before, like there was a never ending kind of feeling of like this, we got to be careful here. So again, with Bates and all that they've done, I hate to keep using the same term, but it's a proof that this can work. This can happen. They can do it the way they want to do it. And I also think, guys, we talked about it in midsummer. I know, Eddie, you and I have had some conversations about it, kind of off air in the few seconds that we're not on air at the moment. But the NIL stuff, I think Oklahoma saw that they had to maybe be a little more aggressive there, maybe do some things that they were, kind of leery of. But to land these kind of guys, this is the game you have to play. And I think Oklahoma really did the work here against one of the schools that we all know is one of the NIL kind of, I guess the perfect term is kingpin. So to have that and really I think it was just an entire package. And at the same time, I don't think Brent had to go against his belief in being relational in his recruiting and having those things, because that's a big part of this. I mean, David has a real comfort around, from literally the top man in Brent Venables to the, the first year staffer.
I don't know about you guys, but this just feels like sort of more of a sigh of relief than a celebration. Yeah. It's like, oh, they finally did it. But Josh, moving forward with David, we've seen how active he is on social media. I mean, he enjoyed every bit of his recruitment. How much will this help with the rest of this 2024 class? I mean, there's still some big targets out there in terms of guys on the defensive front, Nigel Smith, Danny Okoye. I mean, is he going to be one of those guys that we hear about it all the time with a quarterback leading the charge in a recruitment class, but is he a guy that you think can be maybe the leader of this group?
I think there's something to that. I think when, you look at a guy like Jaden, who's already in the boat. You have Wyatt Gilmore, who I think everyone just kind of tends to forget about, but it's a guy that Oklahoma likes. I mean, he's not a guy that Oklahoma took late or offered late. They offered him early, and when he was ready to commit, they were ready to take it. So this is a guy they have a good opinion of. But David, it's kind of like, when you hear NFL coaches or even college coaches talk, your best player has to be your leader. It's just going to be, that's just the way it is. And that's David Stone. Like he is we'll see where their careers go. But as far as what these guys can quantify and what they can see, he's the most notable recruit in this class that Oklahoma is likely to land. So I think there is just an inherent leadership that kind of comes with that. And I think David, with the personality he has and the way he likes to interact with other players and, get on Instagram Live and do some of the other stuff that he'll do, I think that can only help. And I think when you look at it, Nigel Smith, I don't know that that's going to have a big role there, because I think Nigel pretty much knows what he's going to do. I think that decision's largely been made. And I actually happened to see Nigel Thursday night out at the McKinney Longview game, watching Taylor Tatum go take McKinney to the wire on Thursday. But with Nigel, I think it's largely done. But obviously, it certainly won't hurt Oklahoma to have another elite defensive lineman. These guys know, my job's easier if there's elite players standing next to me. The one that's interesting is Danny Okoye, who I think really is kind of a dogfight at this moment. I think it's largely Oklahoma and Tennessee. I think Texas is absolutely still in there as well. But to have David, and then if you could land Nigel to go along with what you already have in Jaden Jackson and Wyatt Gilmore, you're starting to build one of the better defensive line classes probably since that Gerald McCoy group that we referenced earlier, with McCoy and Beal and Adrian Taylor kind of being the three headliners in that group. So that's then you're really starting to do something, and you kind of have the framework of, okay, these guys aren't going to be, changing the course of OU's 2024 season, but going forward, you've got some elite potential along your defensive line.
I don't think that there was anybody that was, like-minded people or sound-minded people that were ready to run Todd Bates out of Norman, Oklahoma by any means. He's been here for 13 games so far, but this is kind of one of those jumping-off points for him that it's the biggest recruit that he's been able to land at Oklahoma. What could be the benefit of getting a David Stone? I'm not saying he's going to change what he's doing or anything like that, but I have to think that you do pick up a little bit of momentum there on the defensive line, and specifically for somebody like a Todd Bates who had, he struck out a couple times.
Yeah, well, and it's also interesting. I mean, you look at David and Jaden, you're talking about two IMG guys.
Sure.
Anybody think Oklahoma's not going to be back at IMG next year talking to the next set of, undoubtedly defensive linemen? I mean, IMG is very much built along the line of scrimmage. They realize if they can win those battles, they can do well. So now there's not a lot of, I don't know that IMG is built on brotherhood or anything like that. It's not quite like a normal program, but having those guys come out of those programs in years to come, and again, it doesn't even have to be IMG. You could be talking about Mater Dei or Bosco, and those guys who come from these really elite programs, they can, you can walk in and say, hey, we got David Stone, we got Jaden Jackson, who could have went to Ohio State, Oklahoma, Texas, could have went about anywhere he wanted to go, and we got both those guys to come here. Let them tell you why. And so I think that resonates because, you talk to kids all the time, and they know a coach is going to give you the pitch. I mean, that's the job. And the best coaches do it in a way that you don't realize they're doing it, but it's still a recruiting pitch. It just is. At the same time, the players, they're just telling you what life is like. I mean, because we hear all the time, like, kid got to campus, and then he talked to some players, and all of a sudden that school's not that serious in his recruitment anymore because what he heard he didn't like. So I think having guys that are on your side, and that's where having those good relationships can really pay off, where instead of, I just picked this school for NIL, my coaches care about me. We talked a lot this week about Savion Byrd and his comments about Jerry Schmidt and, Brent Venables and Bill Bedenbow having his back. Like that meant a lot, and I know that resonates with these guys as well. So this absolutely can be large because you get to walk in and say, you're not trying to convince a guy to make a choice nobody else in your roster has made. You're convincing guys, hey, come be the next one, and let's rebuild this defensive line and change the entire narrative about our program.
Josh, we look at this defensive line next year, losing a lot of guys up front for Oklahoma, and maybe we'll have a better picture once we see how the staff handles, Peyton Bowen and PJ Atabare this year. But what kind of role can David play immediately for Oklahoma? Is he a guy that could end up, I don't know about starting, but I would assume he'll be in the rotation next year just because they don't have a ton of bodies coming back.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's got to be appealing for him. Is the situation. There's absolutely playing time to be had there. Now, David, I talk about his explosion and his length. He's still a lean guy. I don't know, Eddie. I guess we all saw him, in early June at camp. And, David Stone's a flat-stomached guy. Like, this isn't some big belly, big-bodied guy. He looks like a power forward. Like he's got a very unique body type at defensive tackle that is somewhat similar to Gerald McCoy at the same age. Gerald was probably a little bigger in the top half than David is, but otherwise very, very comparable body types. And I think with David, it's just about how much he can handle the physicality. Now, coming from a place like IMG, that's a great start because he's played literally the best of the best all throughout his last 2 years of high school. So he knows, or at least he has some frame of reference of what it's going to look like. Now, he gets to college campuses and realize all those guys that were great high school players are now great college players with 3 years of strength and conditioning, and they all bench 450 pounds. So it's a different game. But again, kind of like we talked about with Andy Bass, who I know we're going to get into a little bit, David's ability, like I said, to keep linemen away from his body with his length and his quickness, when you mix those things together, that's something you can win with even if everything else is not perfect. Like, you don't have to have perfect technique. You don't have to have, a 320-pound frame. Like you can cheat it a little bit with some of those things. Now you can't do it down in and down out, but third and longs, those kind of things. Like I would be interested to see if he becomes like almost a situational interior pass rusher as a freshman.
Last one for me on David Stone. Big day for Oklahoma, big day for Brent Venables and Todd Bates with the commitment of the 5-star defensive tackle on Saturday night. What kind of development, and you kind of just mentioned it there, but what kind of development has David Stone undergone over the last 3 years? It feels like we've seen him kind of grow up in front of our eyes. I remember going out to Dell City to watch him play as a sophomore, I believe, right around this time of the year, right when he was getting started in the quote-unquote varsity portion of his OK Preps career to now in the defensive tackle that's number 13 in the country and a 5-star and, playing at one of the premier prep schools. Is that what we call IMG in the country?
Well, obviously I'm going to go catch him this year, but Eddie, the last time I saw him in a game setting, he was beating some Putnam City North Panthers the last time I saw him.
Unfortunately, I think we've deleted that video from the server. That's why I couldn't find it today.
He's never beat Bishop Kelly. That's a fact.
They don't put
and looks unlikely to change unless IMG's schedule gets some late additions.
I don't think that they're going to be hitting up Tulsa or Northwest Oklahoma City. Going from Philadelphia to the mean streets of 122nd and Rockwell would be. I'd be worried about him, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Not the Panthers.
Either. No. Shout out to Coach Lane up there. But no, I think you've seen him change his body a lot because, sure. I mean, that he's a kid as lean as he is now. I mean, I would say from the first time I saw him, he's put on 35 pounds. I mean, he is a different guy. You can tell he's learning how to work out, how to take things seriously at IMG, which, I think there are a lot of things that I think would have been great for David to stay in Oklahoma. And I'm not the world's biggest IMG fan, so I'll totally acknowledge that. But at the same time, for a guy like him that knew where he wanted to go, knew what he was capable of, I can understand it because you're learning how to be a college player while you're still in high school. It's like taking, AP courses or something. Like you are learning how to do it and how to take yourself seriously, how to do the things day in, day out, the weight training, all the other little things that you've got to do to be a great player. He learned those things and is learning those things. So I like what they've done with him. I like, again, he's on the right trajectory. He's not carrying bad weight. He's very muscled up. So I think you've seen good development there. And I think also he's learned to be a better football player. I mentioned seeing him as a sophomore, and it was just this overwhelming force of talent just kind of beating people. But now you watch his tape and you're like, okay, he's using his hands. He's learning how, like I said, to use that length to keep people away from his body and give himself room to work. And he'll only get better. I mean, there's still the nice thing about him is he's developed a lot, and there's still a long way for David to improve and grow.
Massive, massive, massive night for Oklahoma football with the commitment of 5-star defensive tackle David Stone. It's a great time to join Soonerscoop.com. We got a promo running right now. I'm sure that you're well aware of who we are with On3. If you're looking for a 25% annual membership, just go to Soonerscoop.com. Promo code Sooner25. Promo code Sooner25 for a 25% off annual membership at Soonerscoop.com. We'll have plenty more of wrap-up as far as the impact of what this means for the 2024 class, what this means with Dominic McKinley, what this means with Nigel Smith, and the list goes on and on and on as Oklahoma continues out its 24 recruiting class. A very, very big day. That is promo code Sooner25, 25% off annual membership to Soonerscoop.com. And we're only 7 days away from kickoff in Norman, Oklahoma. In fact, we'll be doing the Eskridge Lexus postgame podcast probably around this time come next week when Oklahoma opens the season against Arkansas State. Josh, it was a massive week in recruiting. I think that that's something that we talked about on Wednesday in the first edition of the Soonerscoop.com recruiting report. And it all, if we want to go back to Thursday, kind of started there over at Heritage Hall High School with the official commitment of Andy Bass from Heritage Hall looking to lead the Chargers to their second consecutive 2A state championship. Or 3A. Excuse me. Brett's going to kill me. I apologize to the Chargers.
Hear about that.
I apologize to the Chargers. They're moving up to 4A next year. They're making another run in 3A. I apologize as a somebody that has spoke to the team, a state championship team, mind you. They ran through the playoffs after I talked to them last year. I apologize to everybody off of 122nd. That is on me. Big day for Andy Bass though on Thursday.
Heritage Hall in the future. That's going to be
That'd
fun
be awesome.
to watch.
Be awesome.
But Eddie, the thing that I noticed was he's one of those guys. And, I listened to the interview you did with him and put up. He's got that way about him where he's very confident. Clearly, he mentioned we're going to go win another state title. That's what we're doing here. Like it wasn't well, we really hope, and if all the chips fall right, that kind of deal. Like it was like an OU recruiting reporter with Williams Ranieri not part of the narrative. Like they're real confidence, real chest puffed, but at the same time not arrogant about it. Like he's an interesting kid to talk to because there's clearly belief in himself, but at the same time, when I talked to him, I believe it was Wednesday night, and we were just kind of talking about a decision and what went into it. You could tell he's a kid that just feels lucky to have this opportunity. Like this is what Brent Venables talked about. I know you tweeted some of the, the stats about how much they've went to work in Oklahoma since Brent's arrival. And he is what Brent's talking about. Like he's a kid that legitimately cares about playing for the University of Oklahoma. It means something to him. He's obviously got family connections. I assumed you were a little jealous. His grandfather had played golf at Oklahoma. There was some real connection there.
I didn't know that. I'm going to start hitting up the family.
It's not every day I learn something, about these guys, but that was an unknown fact to me. And Andy and I have talked for months. So I thought that was a cool little excerpt from that. But we talked about it on Wednesday on the first recruiting report. This is a good win for Oklahoma. I think it says a lot. I talked earlier about the NIL stuff. Oklahoma's doing work in that department. They're making things like this possible where maybe Andy picks a full scholarship up by the end of the cycle, but even if he doesn't, Oklahoma's made it lucrative enough for him to be fine. Sure. And so I think that, and, we've seen it with Bergen Kaiser. We've seen it with several other guys as well. So I just like the way OU's building not only this class, but just the way they're using their resources, and especially in state.
Andy Bass joins Xavier Robinson from Carl Albert, Michael Patterson, Westmore, Josh Iasosa from Edmond Santa Fe, as well as Bergen Kaiser, who's joining the program as a preferred walk-on, committed a couple weeks ago. Talking with Andy and just talking with some people around Heritage Hall, it seems like, and you've reported on this as well, Josh, the conversations that he had with Jeff Lebby, DeMarco Murray, Brent Venables, and it all kind of coincided with his performance at the OU football camp over the summer, and then kind of, I think, continued through over the last couple months. In fact, I think, it could be said that Andy had kind of made his decision on what he wanted to do at the beginning of the month, but wanted to do it before the season, make the announcement. They really sold him on a plan to what they want to get out of him once he gets to Norman.
Oh, I mean, and that is... Again, he is one of those guys, and I talk about a few of these every year. He is going to be as useful as his offensive coordinator can be creative, because he is not a guy that fits into one specific role, or he's not a clear-cut running back. He's not a clear-cut wide receiver. He can do a little bit of a lot, and if you can use him, maybe use him in the return game some, there's a lot of ways you can go with Andy Bass, and I think if Jeff Lebby can, it's one of those deals where Jeff Lebby can just sit down there and start jotting stuff out in a playbook and kind of say, hey, I like this. I don't like this. This could be where he fits for us. And I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how he develops over time. But even early in his career, you can see a way where, okay, they're going to get him on the field for 10 or 12 snaps and see – okay, we're going to give the defense some looks here. We're going to see how they respond to it. And depending on what they do, okay, we either activate what we've got set up or we let it go and then we wait till the next week. So he just provides them with a lot of options, and he does it like we've talked about for years. With Andy Bass in the field, you can go 4 wide, you could go double backs, you could do a lot of different stuff without ever having to take him off the field.
Josh, I know a few days ago we were talking off the air about comps for him, and I'm not always a big player comparison guy, but do you have any comps? Did you ever come up with one? I know you were struggling a little bit the other day trying to come up with one, but do you have one?
The one I ended up kind of settling on was a much more of a it was more as a pure running back, because like I told you when we were having that discussion, I kept struggling. Like I'd see it, I'd find a running back that I kind of like to comp to and think, well, but he's got that receiver skill. And then I start looking at receivers like, but he's a running back. Like I couldn't. So I was like, I'm just picking a side here and going to stick with it. And the guy I kind of ended up with is one that I'm not even sure most people will really remember, but a guy named Roy Halou that played at Nebraska in the 2010s, played with Taylor Martinez. Similar frame, kind of, like Roy, I think he ended up at like 215, 220 is some of the numbers I was looking at while he was at Nebraska. And, but still kind of wiry within that. Like still you felt like, oh, he could put on more if he needed to. And went to the combine, I think ran like 4.46 or something like that. So a guy that has that kind of speed as well. But I thought the thing that stood out to me the best as far as the comp was, you look at them and maybe you don't expect it, but they're very physical players. Roy Halou could take on a hit, played in the NFL for 3 or 4 years, I believe. And so I like that. And I mean, let's be honest, I tried to stay away from the Rex Burkhead comparison. That
might
was
have
just
killed
not going to be good for anybody.
Yeah, that might have killed somebody in the control room.
He's cussing right now, I'm sure of it.
No doubt about it. Well, and like you said, I don't think that people have a really good idea of like just how thick he is up top. He is a very, very impressive guy. And when you put together that with, some of these track numbers that we went over on Wednesday, 10.56 100, 21.74 200, and then he was on a 4x100 team that ended up winning the state championship as well. It's exciting. It will be interesting to see how he fits into Oklahoma's offense moving forward. But, just another, like you said, this is when you look at what he did at the summer camp and then you look at what he did his junior season and what he's going to do his senior season, and you see the highlights from the camp right here. This is where he actually earned his offer. It is like just a kind of an old-fashioned recruitment in terms of going out and evaluating somebody and deciding that you want them to come to your program.
It doesn't get a lot more straightforward than Andy Bass. Like he talked about liking Oklahoma, and then he kind of wasn't sure about the offer, and then going, and talking with Brent and Levy a few more times about what their vision, and obviously DeMarco Murray as well, kind of what their vision was, how they saw him fitting into the plans. And he was like, okay, I'm in. Like it just wasn't complicated. Like he knew the kind of answers he wanted. He knew what he was looking to find out, and they gave him all the information he felt he needed. And he was like, okay, I don't need to waste any more time. And it's old school. It's almost new school in its execution, but the way it played out is very the way recruiting was 15 years ago. I mean, it was just based on the merit, and you kind of went that way. But again, I like Bass. I think this is he's a nice addition to this class. I mean, he really, a lot of people, like I said, will kind of try to minimize him in one way or another. And Eddie, to your point about how impressive he is physically, I had been, that day at camp, I had been out watching, I think the linebackers work, if I remember right. And I come in and I'd talked to Andy before. I had, messaged with him. I'd seen his huddle film. I talked to Brett about him. I'd never seen him with my own two eyes. And I walked past and I go, who the hell is that guy? Because, I mean, he really is. Like, this is not like, oh, he's a big, sturdy kid. Like, this is a kid that has spent time in the weight room, and it shows. And you're just like, wow, okay. And then you're watching him just run past one guy after another, a couple of which are, Big 12 commitments. I mean, he cooked a couple of those kids. And you're kind of like, okay, this is not just a small school tough kid that ran a good 40 time. Like, this is a good football player.
He just feels like, and you guys talked about it earlier, but he just feels like a kid that in years past he ends up at a Kansas State, and you look up and you're like, how did that kid get out of Oklahoma? And
Sure.
I think that's the biggest thing for me, is like being able to get kids like that, whether it's a preferred walk-on or scholarship or whatever it is. Like, it's just, that's the kid that we look up in 3 or 4 years and maybe he's making a big play in a big game.
And it's one of those things too that, right now in the moment, it feels like if, you add in the stuff that we've talked about on the pros practice reports, it does feel like you have some guys that are, in a way, taking a chance on the culture that Brent Venables and this team is building. And, you go back into some of the stuff the players have talked about, the belief, the Savion Byrd stuff that we talked about with coaches, kind of helping them along the way. I think that it's a major positive as Oklahoma enters the second year under Brent Venables. It'll be the first year for Peyton Bowen, and he'll be joined by his brother, who also committed to Oklahoma on Thursday. Eli Bowen, a 4-star cornerback out of Denton Guyer. He's getting ready to start his senior season, Josh. And, I'll be honest, Hayes Fawcett put out the tweet on Thursday evening, and I was like, oh, okay. I knew he had cut down a list to 2, Oklahoma and Texas. But, if you want to just look at it big picture, and then we'll look at it with Eli as a player, this is another kind of massive win. It's hard not to put 2 and 2 together and say, Peyton must be having a pretty damn good time in Norman.
Yeah, contrary to some of the reports that were out there that he was unhappy and that was going to affect Eli Bowen, things must be going pretty well.
Josh is spicy today. I like this.
I mean, come on, that was always so silly,
Yeah.
but whatever.
No, it was.
I mean, we got to take our shots. We got to get him in there. But no, with Eli, I think when he put out the top 2 of Oklahoma and Texas, you kind of knew which way this was going to go. And I kind of like, I talked about last Wednesday with the David Stone stuff. Like, you weren't hearing Miami with David Stone from Miami people. Kind of the same deal with Eli Bowen. You weren't hearing a lot of Texas talk. So you thought it would go this way, but there was no indication of a timeline from anyone. Like, I mean, Hayes, to his credit, like that was, he was on top of that. And we knew something was going to come sooner or later. And you kind of felt like after Eli watched Peyton last year, he wasn't going to go the distance and deal with all that chaos and that kind of stuff, because he seems like a kid that just really doesn't want any of that, attention, or he's very low key. So I think that has been kind of interesting to follow. But this is a guy, I've said it over and over again. I said it last year when Oklahoma was recruiting Peyton. Everybody I talked to, this is independent of Peyton. This is a guy Oklahoma likes. They think he's got real coverage skills, very good feet. And he's a little on the smaller side, but Brent has had guys like that. You go back to DeMontre Hurst. You can go through the list. Derek Strait was far from a huge corner or anything like that. So they've never shied away from a guy that was a little on the smaller side if they felt he could play. And clearly they think Eli Bowen can help, because they are in on some good corners. Jay Valai has done a nice job kind of quietly getting that room back to where it needs to be. And there is belief that this is another step in that direction.
Josh, when they got Peyton, it was obvious that this is a guy that can come in and maybe be a day one starter, and his ceiling was through the roof. What is Eli's ceiling? Is he a multi-year starter? I mean, what does his potential look like?
I think that's a really good way to put it, George. I think I could see very much a world where he is a multi-year starter, plays for Oklahoma, plays well, gets a combine invite, that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, he is a talented athlete. I don't want people to misunderstand the situation. He is well known to his brother? No, he's just not. But I do think this is a guy that he's going to need some time, because, we can talk about, you can be shorter and still be successful. Yeah. But kind of the opposite of some of the things I was talking about, again, with David Stone earlier. You don't have the margin for error. When you're a little smaller, your technique has to be right on point. Your feet have to be excellent. You have to be stronger than the average person your size. I mean, like you've got to put that work in the weight room. You've got to minimize all possible other problems because you're already fighting an uphill battle a little bit because people are going to want to throw up top of you. They're going to want to, look at the bowl game last year. They're going to want to line Johnny Wilson up over the top of you and say, hey, guard this guy that's a foot taller than you are and make it work. So you're already fighting a few battles from the very beginning. So he's going to need time. This is a guy that I would expect to come in, probably redshirt, get his work in under Jerry Schmidt. And then by year 2, maybe we see where things are with Gentry Williams, Josiah Wagner, some of those guys that by that point will be established players, and he can kind of see if he can work himself into a role. And guys, even to consider, and I don't know that this is under consideration at all, but it's worth remembering that Brent has deployed guys in that cheetah role that were basically corners. You can go back to Brandon Shelby, that was basically a 5'10", 185-pound corner that Oklahoma blitzed off the edge all the time. So I don't think it has to be just one role or another. I think they see him as a corner, but if he can play, they'll find a way to get him on the field.
Bunch of really good news on the recruiting trail for Oklahoma. With everything that we've talked about here, I believe they're up to 22 now. 22 commits in the class. Are we kind of about to hit that period outside of Nigel Smith, Dominic, McKinley, where everything kind of slows down as guys get into their senior season?
I think that's what you're going to see. You look at it, and we're still waiting. We'll see with the Grant Brick situation what's going to happen there. But I think, look, the guys that we kind of have a more clear timeline on, Dominic McKinley, Nigel Smith. You get into those scenarios, and Dominic McKinley set to announce on September 1st. I don't think that's going to be Oklahoma. Just my impression tells me he's looking elsewhere, or it's a little more focused elsewhere, I guess is the better way to say that. And with Nigel Smith, I think it's Oklahoma or A&M. I feel pretty confident it's Oklahoma. Obviously the news of today helps OU move in that direction, so we'll see where that all goes. But I like that for Oklahoma, and then you watch Danny Okoye, who, when I talked to him several months ago, he was talking about a decision in November, maybe early December. Now it's like it could be late September, early October. So his timeline's clearly moving up as I think more schools are starting to run, out of spots, starting to fill up their spots, and as much as anything, want to know where he stands. Like, we want you in this class, but we can't pass up all these other guys and then you go somewhere else. So I think he is starting to realize, like, if he wants to go exactly where he wants to go, he might have to come to a decision a little earlier than he'd planned.
I'm the king of bad comparisons, but it just feels like with Danny Okoye specifically, this is a situation that if, like, the roles were reversed, say he's from Texas, anywhere but Oklahoma, it feels like Oklahoma would recruit him the entire time, and then he would wait for, whatever home state he's from to have a good season, and then he would commit there, and Oklahoma would lose out. Reversed with this situation specifically, if Oklahoma has a good season, that has to help in seeing what they're able to do defensively, and especially with the defensive line, if they can get some guys to come out and play really well. How much would that help as he accelerates that decision? Would it almost be better, I guess is what I'm asking, for him to wait, even though he's saying he wants to do it early now?
I don't think there's any question. I think Danny, Danny's been open about it, that he was really high on Oklahoma and the season went how it went, and he got a little scared that maybe things weren't going in the right direction. And then there were other circumstances as well.
Right.
He's been pretty open that his mom wanted to see him somewhere else, and that was, just kind of the way that went. But now that dynamic seems to have changed, I think Danny is more open to the entire process. And if Oklahoma can show him they can show him some continuation of where they started last year, get back to where they were following that Nebraska game last year and kind of keep that momentum through the first month or two, then hey, maybe really, like you're saying, Eddie, maybe by late October, not only is he ready to make the decision, he knows what he wants to do. So I think I think that's possible. And Eddie, I don't think it's a terrible analogy that there is some element of Danny just waiting for Oklahoma to show him, hey, it's not just about the relationships. It's not just about the recruiting. Like, we're going to get this right on the field too. Sure. And I think if they can do that, I think Oklahoma's pretty tough to beat in the Danny Okoye situation.
Has he set a time to come up and go to a game this year?
His current plan is to be there for the season opener, like next weekend for his official visit. So, and that's one of the nice things with the way Brent handles these summertime officials. He may be one of, he's the only official visit I know of for sure. And with as few targets as they have left, there can't be many. I mean, like, it won't be more than 3 probably. So they can really, with that huge staff, they can make sure he and his family are just showered with attention, and anything you need, hey, man, we got it. And so I think that can play a big role, especially for a kid like Danny that does want to feel that bond, does want to feel close to who he's around and know that they care, because Danny's that way. Like, he's a guy that's going to walk up and hug you and talk to you and do all those things. So for them to be able to show him, hey, we care about you as well, I think that's big for OU.
Seems like a great kid. The season has started. The senior year for a bunch of Oklahoma 2024 commitments has already begun. Josh, you were out in the DFW area in McKinney on Thursday night seeing the number 1 running back in the country, Taylor Tatum, the Oklahoma running back commit. A tough night for the Lobos. They're the Lobos, right? Is that correct, or am
That's
I
right.
wrong? Yes.
You got to Lobo up, Eddie.
I haven't said the O word, and I'm getting mascots from East Texas.
You haven't said the O word?
I don't think so. Orgasm, right?
What is it again?
Is that what you speak of? No, we're on fire right now. But no, you saw Taylor Tatum. You sent back the clip. He had the 64-yard touchdown pass, touchdown run, excuse me. He also had a touchdown pass on Thursday night. Was that the first time that you had seen Taylor Tatum in action in person?
No, I have seen him.
Oh, you saw him last year.
I saw him. Yeah, I went and saw him last year.
That's right.
And had a great game that night against Marshall. That was kind of the reason I went to this McKinney game. For those that don't know, McKinney's defense, their back 7 probably has 5, 6 literal, Power 5 type players in it. I mean, they are very talented. They're very fast. A couple of them, Zadian Gentry is a 2025 cornerback offer for Oklahoma. Riley Pettijohn is a 2025 linebacker offer for Oklahoma. Big, long, athletic kid. But I mean, you're watching the clip now. Like, Taylor, the one time he was able to get into space, he outruns everybody to the end zone. I mean, and when you talk about him, and you can see how big and physical he is on these clips. He is Taylor has put on some weight. I know our guy Len Bias on the Crimson Corner was joking with Taylor about whether he was going to end up playing first base for Longview baseball. He really has bulked up, but looked and to a point that I almost wonder, like, maybe he's not where he was. And then you saw him break that run, and you're like, oh no, he's fine. Like, no problem here. So, because the guy, for those that want to go back and watch that clip, watching it on YouTube, the number 1 who follows him into the end zone is Xavier Filsaime, the safety that's committed to Florida. That's a top 100 player, top 50 for some people, that ran like 10.65 as a sophomore in the 100. So you're talking about a guy that absolutely can run, and Taylor outruns him to the end zone. So that is, you can see him coming from the opposite side of the field. It's not like for like. I'm not telling you it is, but there's plenty to go there with Taylor Tatum. And what I loved, and I didn't really get a chance to see any of it because Longview just couldn't connect with him. Their passing game really struggled last night. Excuse me, on Thursday night. And they lined him up out wide multiple times, tried to hit him on some wheel routes, tried to get him, isolated on some safeties. And that's there. I mean, like I've said before, there's some Joe Mixon here. And
I was just getting ready to ask that.
Yeah. seeing him last night, I feel more confident about that than ever. I'm not saying he's quite as physically blessed as Joe is, but the style of play is very, very similar.
That was the first thing as I'm uploading everything from that you sent over from the game. I told George he is bigger than I thought, a lot bigger.
Mm-hmm. When I saw him, like I said, I saw him about mid-season last year, and I would guess he was probably 6 foot, 195. He's 215 if he's a pound now. I mean, he's really put on some weight. And again, it's not like he's carrying it badly or anything like that, but he's got tree trunks for legs. He's a big, powerful guy. He's what you're talking about. Because, I was talking to you guys before we started this. They're down 20-14 in the fourth quarter, and they call they put him at quarterback and call just a keeper for Tatum on 4th and 1 inside their own 20. And he just bounces outside and gets the yardage, fights through a couple tackles. Because like I said, that McKinney defense was keying on him all night, which is what led to the touchdown pass you referenced, Eddie. They run a toss sweep to him. That whole defense just flies to the football, and Longview's receiver's just standing wide open behind the defense, and he just makes an easy little throw. There's part of me that wonders if Taylor Tatum might not get some Andy Bass treatment as the year goes on, maybe run some more quarterback, because he was there were 4 quarterbacks that took snaps for the 2 teams last night. Taylor Tatum threw a better ball than I saw from anybody else all night. He had a couple really nice throws, and you're like, if that's what you've got to do to get this offense going, that's what you got to do. And there's no question that everything that they had success with pretty much ran through him.
Sounds like Davis Bevel's in trouble next year. I'm just kidding.
It might be.
Sorry
anyways.
to the Jackson Arnold people. I know that they're going to be really angry about that. We're kidding. It's a joke. It's been a great week for Oklahoma. It's going to be a great week next week for Oklahoma as they open the season on Saturday, 1 week from today. It's here. Game week will be here. We'll be talking to Brent Venables on Tuesday for the first week of or the first initial press conference, George.
Yep.
I think we're going to get coordinators on Monday, maybe a depth chart. I know some of you nut jobs like that kind of stuff out there. So it's here, and it's a great time to join Soonerscoop.com. Sooner promo code Sooner25 for 25% off annual membership, as well as plenty of the Make Lindsay Street Great Again merchandise right behind me. 20% off for all of the Make Lindsay Street Great Again merch. Promo code We Did It. So, Josh, I appreciate it, man. It was this is the best time of the year. High school football has begun. College football is obviously right around the corner. Damn, we went that entire way.
I don't believe that you didn't say it earlier.
Well, I might have. I blacked out for a second. It's all right. Until next time, we'll probably try and do something on Monday as far as a little bit of a weekend recap, and then we'll be right into everything that comes with game week as Oklahoma opens the season on Saturday, 11 a.m. It's going to be 1,000 degrees in Norman against Arkansas State. I might die. We'll talk to you next time.